Well, hello, everyone. I am Jeffery Deaver, and I am delighted to be here in conversation with my good friend and fellow author, Victoria Selman. Thanks to our good friends at Quercus, thanks to our wonderful friends at Barnes & Noble. I am the author of the Lincoln Rhyme and Coulter Shaw thriller series. And what I'd like to do now is introduce you to our wonderful writer whose book I'll be presenting today, Victoria Selman. Victoria majored in some great subjects at Oxford. I guess you studied other stuff too, but the ones all I care about is really criminal profiling and criminal psychology. At my college, we couldn't do that. We had to take like biology and math and things like that. But anyway, those sound like great things to study. A Sunday Times bestseller, Victoria is the author of the critically acclaimed Ziba Mackenzie criminal profiling series, and her debut novel, I'm adjusting my glasses here, Blood for Blood, was shortlisted for the prestigious CWA Dagger Award and has sold over 500,000 copies. No, I'm not jealous yet. Victoria has written for the independent, co-hosts Crime Time FM, and compiles the Afraid of the Light charity, I love that title, anthology series, and that has been shortlisted for a CWA Dagger Award as well. And for our American listeners, the Dagger is basically the Edgars of the UK. I'm delighted to discuss Truly, Darkly, Deeply, again from Quercus, and I want to make sure, lest I forget, we're going to say it right up front, you can, of course, always get a copy from our friends at barnesandnoble.com or your local Barnes & Noble store. Now, okay, first, some praise. Did I mention jealousy? Okay, I'm going to be jealous again a little bit here. How's this? Patricia Cornwell said this book you will not be able to put down. Full of quiet menace. I love that one. Tim Logan, Abigail Dean, totally original. And some author on this side of the pond said, it will keep you up all night. His name's Deaver, and he knows, at least in this regard, what he's talking about. This book was, by the way, an Instant Times bestseller, and another UK reference was a pick for the Richard and Judy show. That is kind of the Oprah Winfrey book club of the UK. Well, what I'm going to do now is tell you a little bit about the book, which, by the way, I did read and read in one sitting, and I guarantee you will as well. So let's get to just the bare bones of the story. 12-year-old Sophie and her mother, Amelia Rose, moved to London from Massachusetts, where they meet the charismatic Mattie Melgren. And he quickly becomes an intrinsic part of their life. But the relationship between the two adults starts to fracture, and things have a bad falling out, particularly because Mattie is ultimately arrested and goes to prison for murdering women who, oddly enough, bear a strange resemblance to Amelia Rose. Now, that continues. We cut 20 years into the future, where Sophie gets a letter from prison with the information that Mattie is now dying and wants to have a discussion with her. The rest, as they say, is history. And as I, an author, live in fear of, bad reviews and writer's block and spoilers, I'm going to hand over to Victoria now to tell us what she will about the book, about the plot, and maybe a little bit about where the idea came from.
Well, thank you so much. What an introduction from what an amazing author yourself. How very extraordinary and thrilling to be on this with you, Jeff. So thank you so much for doing this with me. Truly, Darkly, Deeply is it's a story that really explores a serial killer's legacy through the eyes of his daughter. So as Jeff says, the book actually opens with my protagonist, Sophie, receiving a letter from her father, who's been in prison for serial murder, saying he's dying and he wants to meet. Now, he's been in prison for 20 years, but for 20 years, she hasn't really been sure whether or not he's really guilty. Doubts have remained for her. And with him dying and with him wanting to meet, it looks like she might finally get the answers that she craves. But, ... will the truth set her free, or will it bury her deeper? So this is a dual timeline narrative where we explore what happened through the eyes of child Sophie and the ramifications of what happened through adult Sophie as she struggles to come not only to terms with her personal history and what her father may or may not have done, but also whether he really is a serial killer. It's a story which is a mystery. It's a thriller. Actually, you said, Jeff, and I think about this often. Actually, you said there are two types of crime story. Do you remember? You said there are mysteries and thrillers, and a mystery is all about what has happened, and a thriller is all about what will happen. And I love the way you express that. But I wonder as well if sometimes we can marry the two, and it's what I've tried to do in Truly, Darkly, Deeply. So there is a mystery and there is a thriller element. What is going to happen if and when she discovers the truth?
And the best crime fiction, as this is a combination of the two, of course. Agatha Christie or Sherlock Holmes are primarily mysteries, what happened in the past, and yet there's a driving element to push the story forward to see if the bad guy will get away or if the bad guy or gal will murder in the future. And that was, as a suspense writer, you ended that so well on a high note. Now I'm sure people are chomping at the bits, and I know they're going online to buy the book right now, but I hope they'll pay attention to us for a bit longer. Now, where did the idea come from? I mean, was this just a product of your imagination, or was there a real crime that occurred that put the seed in your thoughts?
Yeah, it is actually based on true crime. So we've talked about this before. I'm fascinated by true crime and the criminal psyche. But what intrigues me just as much is how serialists are able to do those close to them. How so often after a serial killer is caught, the family members apparently have no idea. They can't conceptualize that they've been living with a monster. And that intrigued me on a, I suppose, philosophical level. But I was actually watching that movie. Do you remember with Zac Efron, the Ted Bundy movie? It has a very long title, something along the lines of awful, terrible, vile, and disgusting. Very many adjectives. And what struck me is, and I hadn't realized this until I watched the movie, that Ted Bundy, who is of course was a prolific serial killer, possibly one of the most famous ones, didn't just have a girlfriend. His girlfriend had a daughter. And the girlfriend and Ted were together for about 6 years. He effectively brought this child up as his own child. And the film was very preoccupied with the relationship between the girlfriend and Ted Bundy. But for me, what was more interesting was actually the child's relationship with him. How would it affect a child growing up with the legacy of having loved a killer, a monster? How could you ever come to terms with that? How could you live with the guilt of not having realized? And so often, I think in crime fiction, we focus on the killer themselves, don't we? But I was interested in the ripple effects of crime, not just on the actual victims, but the family who effectively are victims too, because they are dealing with the fallout of these terrible crimes.
Well, and what I found so fascinating was your ability to get into the young Sophie and the older Sophie's head. That's quite a skill to be able to inhabit. Well, first of all, people of other ages than we are. Now, at one point, you were Sophie's age. It's not like someone who's 12.
Long time ago, Jeff.
Oh, not nonsense. Last week, I'm sure, Victoria. But the ability to step into someone else's shoes, and how difficult was that for you to go back, not just at that age where you can figure people are reading Winnie the Pooh, et cetera, and Dr. Seuss, but in the mind of somebody who was having her doubts and then who was devastated by what she learned.
It's interesting, isn't it? I mean, I'm a mother, so I have children, so I get a little bit of a cheat on that, I guess, because I see how children think, and it's constantly fascinating to me. But I think actually what was the biggest challenge was how children talk, because as writers, we can slip into other people's shoes, other people's skins, can't we? But actually, the way children speak is very different to us. They're very much more direct. They're quite black and white. They don't tend to ask questions. They tend to make statements. And so those were things I almost had to feel my way and be quite conscious of in terms of the dialogue. And actually, it was, as a writer, I mean, it's always wonderful to have a challenge, isn't it? I mean, that's what keeps us going. I think the challenge of trying new things. And for me, this was something new to try, and I really enjoyed slipping into her shoes.
Well,
and
I was
on the adults ones.
I was most impressed that Sophie wasn't like, I'm like so over it. It's like so cool, dude. You know,
I was never cool enough to talk like that. So probably
yeah,
this.
actually, I don't think kids do. Maybe your children do. I doubt it,
My
though.
kids aren't cool enough either.
I suspect they're rather articulate and so forth. But now, also getting into the mind of a killer, how difficult is that to do?
Well, I hope it's difficult, but actually, in a funny way, this this book isn't really about the killer. That's the funny thing. We see the killer on the page, don't we? Obviously, we see him through action, but we don't ever see his thoughts, because I'm really much more interested in the people around the killer. So we see him filtered really through Sophie and her interpretation of what's happening. So I didn't have to get into the killer's head per se. I had to imagine that I was with a killer. Maybe that's more daunting. I'm not sure.
I think it very well might be. I'd like, when we writers get together, we always talk about nuts and bolts. How long did it take you to write the novel? How did you go about it? And maybe research, if you could talk a little bit about that.
For sure. Okay, well, let's talk about the nuts and bolts, because I do love our conversations about that. It was, it's funny. Some books write very, very quickly, don't they? I mean, you must have this experience too, and others take a lot longer. And I used to think that the ones that took a long time were the ones that wouldn't be any good. And I actually don't think that anymore. I think each story has its own way of being told, and some roads just take longer to get down. So that's fine. As it happens, Truly Darkly Deeply flowed very, very fast. I wrote it during lockdown, so I suppose I didn't have other distractions beyond homeschooling my children, which was actually quite a distraction. But it flowed very quickly. Once, like you, I'm a planner, so I have a very, very detailed plan before I start. So I knew where the story was going. I knew where the twists were. I had a very clear roadmap. But the voice is only ever something you can really get into when you're actually putting pen to paper or fingers to keyboards, as we do these days. And it just flowed very easily. And it's funny, I didn't struggle to think about names. The names came to me very quickly, almost organically. They just felt, maybe this sounds a bit ridiculous, but they just felt right. And it takes a while sometimes, doesn't it, for a character's name to kind of sit with the character.
I agonize. I changed them 10 times. The good news is computers now have global search and replace. I mean, can you imagine Dickens, and he finishes who knows what, Bleak House, and says, that's not a good name. I've got to it's not going to be Jarndyce and Jarndyce. It's going to be Fred versus Smith.
Could you?
What a nightmare.
What an absolute nightmare. But it just flowed very, very well. And in terms of research, it's a little bit of a cheat, possibly basing your novels on true crime, because I wonder if it means you don't have to use your imagination so much. I mean, there you are with your wonderful plots, Jeff, that just awe-inspiring, how brilliant. I always say with your books, they're effectively creative writing masterclasses.
Oh my goodness.
They're wonderful. But they're all from your imagination. Whereas for me, I'm delving into something that's really already happened, and I'm just putting my creative spin on it. So it wasn't a book about Bundy. It's a mishmash of all sorts of other serial killers. I think anyone who enjoys true crime will recognize various different killers within these pages. I mean, the Green River Killer, he had a child too. All sorts. There's the Zodiac, who springs to mind. All sorts of different killers. So research for me was looking into true crime cases, and then making those cases my own, if that makes sense.
Oh, it absolutely does. Of course, it's good about, you're able to draw on that. In my case, imagination, I am a sick and twisted human being. You do understand that, don't you? So I have to be kind of...
You seem charming to me.
Well, it wasn't Bundy, if I remember correctly. When it comes to the actual act of like revising and editing, do you do much of that? I mean, if you wrote this book that quickly, was that pretty much done when you finished it?
No, I do a lot of editing. So although I do plan very, very carefully, my problem is I'm always in a bit of a rush to tell a story. I get very excited. I know where I'm going and I want to go there fast. And actually, don't laugh at this. I mean, as you know, of course, most crime novels are around 80,000 words. Guess how long my first draft was? I mean, you'll go mad.
I would get. I'm going to guess 20,000 words longer.
Okay, worse. I wrote short, so I was rushing. So it was 30,000 words.
Oh, really? I see.
It's ridiculous. I mean, that's a short story practically. Yeah. So for me, it was a matter of going in and letting the scenes breathe. So I think my first drafts are oftentimes extended plans in a way, maybe. So I know where the story is, but I don't always know how the characters react. So I have that. And then I go in and I build the tension and the suspense and the breathing space for the characters to be themselves and the dialogue. And actually, for me, that's the really fun bit.
Well, we've been in many conversations about writing, and we arrive at the same place, but we do it slightly differently. That I write very quickly at first, and then have a lot of dross I just have to cut out. And you have really an extended outline of that 30,000 words, and then you fill it in. And they both work the same. And what I tell my writing students is, whatever works for you works. At the end of it.
Absolutely. Jeff, I 100% agree, because we often get asked, don't we, how do you write? And we're often asked by people who want to write, and as if there is one magic way of doing it. And there's absolutely not. I mean, all the authors I speak to, there is literally no one who writes in exactly the same way.
Somerset Maugham said, there are 3 simple rules for writing a great novel. Sadly, no one knows what they are.
I love that.
It's whatever works for you. Now, to segue slightly to a more serious note, I write about crime, you write about crime. We put our books out there in the stream of commerce for, in our cases, tens of thousands of people to read. What sort of sense of responsibility do you have when you take the fictional story and put it out there for other people to read, keeping in mind that, like me, you probably have a younger readership as well?
Yes, I think that's an absolutely excellent question. I think with me, there's an added risk as well, which is I'm basing this on true crime. They're not specifically true crime histories, but they are based on true crime. And I state that very publicly in my disclaimers. So for me, I think the responsibility is possibly even bigger than yours, which is that I have responsibility to the victims that are left behind. Mm-hmm. So if I'm telling a story, I need to be fair to them. And actually, it's one of the reasons I don't base my books entirely on one specific case. Because can you imagine if somebody thought that was them that was being described, and thought that I was describing them in an unfair way? I'm not talking about the killer. I don't care if they think they're unfairly described.
Shame on you. I was a murderer, and you gave me a bad deal, Victoria.
Yes, exactly. How dare you? Absolutely. But for the families of the victims, or the victims themselves, or people who've just been affected by crime in whatever way, because it can affect all of us. I think there's a responsibility there. And in my writing, what I'm trying to do at the moment is shine the camera away, shine the light away from the killer, to tell the victim stories more, to give them a voice, so to speak. And I don't mean in a patronizing or lecturing way, but just I think there are untold stories. So I feel that's my responsibility. And I think the other responsibility, and I'm sure you would agree as well, is I always think, when somebody picks up a book of mine, we've said there were 80,000 words by the end. By the time you and I you've added and you've taken away and I've added, there are about 80,000 words. Mm-hmm. That's, at least if you're reading solidly, a couple of days of somebody's time. And I always feel that someone's trusted me with their time when they pick up my book, and I have to deliver on that trust. There's a contract between us and the reader where I will tell you, I promise I will tell you a good story. I will not be unfair. I will not throw a twist in that's just a plank of wood hammered onto the shed at the end of it just because I want a twist. But when you go back, when you read that twist, you won't say, oh, you'll say, it's got to make absolute sense. And I guarantee, and I think the responsibility as well is that we have, and you absolutely do this, Jeff, I love your characterization, is characters that you can believe in, situations that maybe they're extraordinary, but that we could actually possibly be in ourselves and could imagine ourselves in them. In
response to that, I teach a course in writing several times a year, and it's a lengthy course in writing commercial fiction. And one of my underlying themes is that we do this for the reader. It's not about us. And I give the example that it's our job to be a manufacturer of a product, and that product is mint-flavored toothpaste as opposed to liver-flavored toothpaste. And let's say I get it in my head as a manufacturer, liver-flavored toothpaste, that's a great idea. Nobody's ever heard of that before. I'm going to put that that'll put us on the map. Well, no, that's nonsense. We write for the reader. And like you, I know, because we've talked about this, we spend every waking moment thinking, is this scene going to be too much? Will this be too graphic? Will it be too complicated?
Yes.
Will the character not ring true? And one thing you said that I absolutely loved was the about giving the characters life. And I read once that the part of our brain that I can't pronounce it, it's a medical aspect of the brain, morphological part of the brain, that responds to the real people in our lives, our loved ones, our friends, our family, and the bad boss, the people we hate, creates an emotional response. It's identical to the part of the brain that creates an emotional response with characters. That's why our responsibility is to do what you've done in this book, well, all of your books, frankly, and create that, rich, evocative, meaningful human being that we can relate to.
I think that's absolutely right. And the rich human being is exactly the point, isn't it? Nobody wants to read a flat, two-dimensional character. And actually, there's a lot of conversation, isn't there, about who do readers like, what characters do readers like? And I sometimes wonder if, as writers, people misinterpret that and they think like as in I want to be friends with. And I don't think that's what they mean at all. I think like as in relate, just a different way of saying it. So yeah, I think relating is absolutely critical.
Exactly. I was struck by the cinematic quality, and by cinematic, I do not mean Marvel or DC, which I understand are two different. This is going to tell you a little bit about what I look for in movies. I think there are Marvel heroes and DC heroes, and I don't think they meet. Maybe they do, but they're two different worlds. And I'm kind of tired of, these, superheroes and things. With all respect, they can be a lot of fun. Who doesn't love explosions? But I could see this cutting back and forth in time, actually, as a TV a streaming series. Has there been any interest in
well, funny you should say that. Actually, yes, for a limited TV series. So yes, absolutely, the rights have been bought by Cecil Films for exactly that. So they were the guys who made the King's Speech, and I can't remember the others, but yeah. So exactly, that's what they.
I think I know the company. That would be excellent. In this country, everything's on hold. You heard about the writers' strike, but in the UK, of course, so nothing's happening here. But in the UK, of course. Feel free. Would you do the script, do you think?
You know what? They actually asked me that, and I said no, because I think the script writing is so different, isn't it, to novel writing?
Yeah.
And I might, it's not just a matter of transposing dialogue onto the page and there you have your story. So I think it would be wrong almost for me to do that and to presume that I could with no experience whatsoever. But I would love to see it. I'd love to read.
I mean, I'll be first in line. I'll buy the streaming service, but in my case, I don't play well with others. I'm sorry, we sit in dark rooms and write our books, and then I myself have dogs at my feet. They're in the lockdown at the moment, but then I get the book done, and then it's on to another book. But a movie, you actually have to talk to people. You have to make decisions. You have to compromise. Oh no, that's not going to happen.
I don't do that. No.
No way. Well, my goodness, as always, Victoria and I, for those of you who are out there, have had a number of conversations, and the phrase, who knows where the time goes, comes to mind. But I've been monopolizing your time quite enough here, and we have a number of excellent questions. And I'm going to let you guys do some of the work for me, and I'm going to ask for some of them, right now. And here's a question from Dave, and I won't use last names just because this internet thing, if I use your last name, you'll be getting, ads from my website. So we don't want to do that, but, data mining. But Dave asks, what authors are you reading right now? And I'll take Deaver off the equation because I know your bedside table.
I was going to say Deaver. I was going to say, I have loved your latest Culture Shore novel, as you know.
Oh, thank you. Thank you.
The way you write twists, it's just brilliant. You don't, and with you, your twists aren't just, you don't have one or two. It's practically every chapter, Jeff, is a twist. So absolutely genius. I've also recently read The Quiet Tenant, which is another serial killer novel, actually, that's come out recently, I believe, in the States, Clemence Michon. And it's about a woman who's she's being kept in the shed by a serial killer, and it's very, very well done. She also is more interested in the victims, like I am. What else? I've read These Women, and of course, because I'm now put on the spot, I've forgotten the author's name, so apologies. But again, it's another novel that looks at a series of crimes through the voices of a number of different women who are affected, and they each have their own voice, and the stories coalesce, and it's very cleverly done.
And so, shifting points of view, then.
Shifting points of view, absolutely, very, very unique and different voices, but all really in the same area. And like I said, sort of coming together about a particular crime.
Oh, excellent. Well, Steve asks a very good question. And it's one I don't think in all the years of doing this, I don't think I've heard before. With all of the crime thriller books that have been written and are being written now, does it get harder to think of new ideas or is that part of the fun of being an author?
What a question.
What do you think of that?
I don't know what you think as well, but I think it's funny. There is a lot of sameness in crime fiction I'm noticing at the moment. I get a lot of, I'm sure we both get a lot of proofs to our door, and there's a lot of, it's like, oh, it's one of those. Oh, it's one of those. And it's very important, I think, to constantly be having a unique take on things. And to, as you say, try and understand what readers are wanting. But by the same token, there are only, 5 plot lines, 7 plot lines? Is that what they say?
I've heard it varying from 2 up to 7. So you can pick your template. But
you can pick, absolutely. Everything is a variation on an existing theme, I suppose. But I wonder if, because the best crime fiction is ultimately a comment on society, and because society is always evolving, if that in itself always lends itself to new stories. So it's a convoluted answer. I think it can be difficult to come up with good stories. And I don't think we should rush to tell stories. I think it's worth taking our time to think of the stories we want to tell, and possibly even setting aside stories that aren't quite working. I've just set aside something at the moment, actually, that wasn't going quite the way I wanted. And I think it's important to be ruthless like that, and to constantly be pushing yourself to do better, and just not accepting just because I've written it, spent time, doesn't mean I'm going to keep going.
That's the mark of a real professional, as I tell my students. Writer's block exists for a reason. It's not a bad thing. It's like pain. You go to the doctor because there's a pain, and the doctor will say, well, we'll fix it, or maybe you just live with it for a while. I had an idea for a book that took me 10 years to write. I was blocked, but it wasn't writer's block. I knew how to put the words together. It wasn't time for me to write that book yet. And then I set it aside, and finally it came out. But I'll tell you, probably like you, I have a very short attention span. I'm very prone to boredom, and there is nothing like being a writer. You're never bored.
Right.
I always, in living in fear that my battery is going to go on my computer, I carry around this stuff called paper and a pen. And so I know you haven't heard of that, but it does. I actually know people take my class, and they write their books by hand. And I guess
the whole book, the whole manuscript.
The whole manuscript. And I say, well, you know what, if that works for you, fine. But do you want your dentist to be the person with that treadle drill? No, you kind of want state of the art. Don't you really want to write books with state of the art stuff? But if you're forced to use paper and pen, you're never bored. You can always come up with ideas and wrestle with them and pace back and forth and get the ideas done. That's what makes, some of this has to be about us, right? It has to be fun for us. And that's part of it.
I always think a first draft is, and maybe this is why I rush to tell the story, because a first draft is where you tell yourself the story, isn't it? The second, the third, fourth, and fifth is where you tell it to everybody else. Oh,
that's well said. Can I steal that? I guess we have some witnesses now.
You can steal it. You can have that one.
Man, I suspect there's some barristers and lawyers out there too.
As well, Jeff, because I think that's really important. I think a lot of us have short attention spans. And again, you and I are similar because we both love short chapters, don't we? And I think for me, that's because I have a short attention span, and it's a great way to keep the pace moving, isn't it? If you short chapters, short sentences, just to.
Well, I mean, for your book, take your book, for instance, there was not that I recall any car chases where somebody rolled down the roof in a Guy Ritchie moment and machine gunned the bad guys on the street, unless I skimmed that part.
No, you didn't skim that bit.
Okay, that's good. More power to you. But I'm sorry, that book, you turn pages nonstop to see what's going to happen. And that's really what these books are all about. Frankly, I will say Man Booker books should be about that too. Moving forward to try to find out what's going on, rather than, long, luxurious passages full of scintillating figures of speech and metaphors where you read them and you say, oh, that's brilliant. Oh, breathtaking. I have no idea what it means, but it's brilliant. We want to know what it means and move forward.
You're absolutely right. I think writing should be transparent. It should be well done. Yeah. I mean, that's not to say a sentence shouldn't be crafted. I think almost it should be more crafted to make it transparent. But I think with a good crime novel, you don't actually want to linger on the language, do you? You want to keep.
No. You got Nathaniel Hawthorne, the American writer, said a writer's words should dissolve into pure thought.
I love it.
The readers should not say, "Oh, read the words." They should look at the words and see what the author was.
Yes.
Now I see a couple. Oh, I thought it was just. I thought that was just brilliant. Now, a couple of people have asked about short stories, and I know you're involved in both writing short stories and these anthologies, which is they're great concepts. and I'm misquoting it now, but what's the one, be afraid of the Christmas lights? That's not it, but how does it, what is the title?
Well, Afraid of the Christmas Lights. So it was a series,
Okay.
the Afraid of the Light series, and I launched it during lockdown with a bunch of other writers. It was a series of charity anthologies as a way of collaborating, coming together at a time where we all forced apart. That was the idea. And of course, Afraid of the Light comes from that quote. Is it Plato? I'm going to misquote now, but something like, we can forgive a man, we can forgive a child who is afraid of the dark, but we can't forgive an adult or something who's afraid of the light. So this idea of what it actually means. But yeah, I love a short story. And they're a bit like a palate cleanser, aren't they, between novels, just to give yourself.
Yeah, well said. Palate cleanser, exactly. Yeah. I enjoy writing. I've written a number of them, and they are a palate cleanser, exactly, because probably like you, I write them rather quickly, and it's very gratifying. You start, it's done, maybe spend a weekend or something like that, and that's for a good cause too. I've done a number of those for charities in the US, because you tend not to make a lot of money with short stories. So why not give them away and do
absolutely. Yeah. No, we're still selling it. We're still making money. I mean, we don't advertise it, but every month we can send money to charity, which is just so lovely to be able to do.
Now, do you plan a short story out the same way? Do you do an outline for that as well?
Not in the same way. I mean, I really do write quite detailed outlines for my novels. For my short stories, it's pen and paper. So it's scribbling a few ideas down and sort of a skeleton of where it's going, because you can do it. And I think a short story is normally, the best short stories are a single idea. So they're not overly complex. You don't have to weave the different elements in, but they do follow a structure, obviously, in a similar sort of way.
I did an event with Lee Child, and I think he said he'd never written a short story over 2,000 words. And shorter is often better. Mine tend to get a bit longer, but it's like I call them sniper's bullets. You sit down and you have a big zinger and you move on to something else. Let's see. I want to make sure I don't neglect our wonderful audience here. This question always comes up, and it was true for us before we got started, and it's true for authors who are now trying to make their way in the world. Getting started. How did you get started? How did
I get started?
Yes.
It's funny, Jeff. I wonder if you were the same. But I always wanted to be a writer. I mean, from the age of 7, that was what I was going to do. And I remember there was an event at school. We had some authors coming in. I was 7 years old, and I was the nerd in the front row, literally with a notebook, taking notes of what they were saying. I mean, what did I want? But so I loved it. I wrote my first novel when I was, I think, probably 8, on 2 whole A4 sides of paper. I mean, it was a big piece of work. But I got distracted. Life got in the way. I went to university. I got a job. I had married. I had children. And you sometimes forget your dreams, don't you? And I was, however old I was, my children, my youngest was at preschool, and my husband and I were having one of those silly conversations. What would you do if you won the lottery? Mm-hmm. And it's a particularly silly conversation because we never buy lottery tickets. I mean,
that does limit the odds. Even I, who never gambled, know that.
We're writers. We can use our imagination. So I said I would be a writer. I mean, I didn't even think about it. I would be a writer, and I had a business previously, and I'd paused it because I wanted to bring up the children. And he said, "What's stopping you? The children are at school now. The youngest, okay, it was for a couple of hours a day, but you have time.
That's a couple of hours right there.
A couple of hours, and you can do a lot in a couple of hours." And I thought, what is stopping me? And I signed on. There's an adult learning centre called the City Lit, and I signed on to the creative writing course. It was every Sunday morning, and I had homework to do in the week, which was, I don't know, a short story or an exercise or whatever. I loved it. It was the time I, had to do it. And I loved it, and I loved getting the feedback, and I loved using my brain again, actually, because as a mother of very young children, I felt like I'd stopped, and my identity was wrapped up in them. It wasn't me being me. And I loved it, and I signed on to another one, and I started writing short stories and submitting to literary magazines, and I was getting them published. I won some competitions, and a year on, I was ready. I was ready to write a novel, and I did. And I went through the slush pile, and I got an agent, and the rest went from there. So it was, I think, for me, that was the long answer, and the short answer is having the courage to follow a dream. I think is what I would say. It's how I got started.
I think I was simply oblivious. It never occurred to me that I might fall on my face, which I did a number of times. However, you might be my younger sister, Victoria, because I started writing when I was 12 and wrote my first novel then. And it was 2 pages in a, I mean, yours was a composition book. Mine was only 2 pages, technically a short story, but I called it a novel because I did the cover art. I wrote chapter 1 on 1 page, chapter 2 on the second page, and the end at the end. And it was in the mode of a countryman of yours, Ian Fleming. I was into the James Bond novels, but the same thing. I knew at that point I was going to be a writer, but life intrudes, doesn't it? And relationships, the desire for luxuries like food, water, housing, and pay for that kind of stuff. And the other thing is there are no prodigy writers. Mozart was composing when he was 4, but writers have to live a while. And like you, I'm sure every minute of your experience helped inform your books, right?
Who was it? There was a politician who said, "I'm not going to apologize for my." He was an older politician. "I'm not going to apologize for my experience." And what he meant was, I've lived a life, and that's why it's taken me so long to get where I am, but I'm better off for it.
That's excellent. I'm sorry, in this country, our politicians have a lot to apologize for.
I think it's an American one, but it was a while ago. We also have politicians who need to apologize. But I think that's the point. I wonder if actually, had we maybe followed the dreams earlier, would we have maybe got to where we are now? Maybe not. Maybe you have to have that break.
I was happy to have lived well. I was an attorney for a while, and I think that was probably.
And that's informed a lot of your writing, of course, with the Lincoln Rhymes series.
Yeah. People say, "Well, Jeff, you write criminal books, and you were a lawyer. You must have been a criminal lawyer." And my response is, "Well, I represented large multinational banks."
So there you go.
Draw your own conclusion. Now, I love this question because I feel all the people out there in the audience are our friends. So. So Adele asks, "Are you generally a macabre person?" You seem so cheerful and bubbly, Victoria.
I'm so cheerful. Well, as you said, so was Ted Bundy, right?
Yeah, that's right.
How on earth do I answer that question? Yes, I'm a horrible person, Jeff. I have very dark. You know what? I think we dwell in a dark world, don't we? I mean, literally, actually, both metaphorically, possibly, and in reality now as well. But it means we do worry about things. And I think one of the wonderful things about being a writer, and particularly of crime fiction, is we're able to achieve catharsis through our writing. We're able to explore what concerns us and get to the other end. So maybe that means I'm macabre, maybe it means I'm just, I'm aware of darkness. But maybe by being aware, I can be lighter afterwards.
Well, that brings up a very good point, and a question I had not thought about asking, but I'm going to now. Why do you think people read crime fiction?
It's a big question, actually, isn't it? I think there are lots of reasons. I think predominantly they read to be entertained. I mean, it's probably why we all read, right? And particularly crime, as you say, it's not navel gazing like some literary fiction. It's fast paced. It's at its best, it's funny. I mean, I don't mean ha-ha all the way through, but there's humor in crime fiction.
You have a sense of humor in your writing. Yes, absolutely.
As do you. I mean, but you have to, because I think you always have to offset darkness. Otherwise it becomes too heavy. So it's entertaining. But also we explore things that worry us. I mean, there are reasons that there are different trends within crime fiction that correlate with different time periods. So they say now that there's a rise, for example, I don't particularly read what they call cozy crime, but there is a rise in cozy crime. And they say that's a direct response to the uncertainty we're facing in the world, that people want a puzzle that they can solve. So possibly, therefore, one of the reasons people read is because they are bothered by what's happening in society. They want solution, and that's something that crime fiction, of course, offers at the end of every crime novel. It's almost we talked about contracts for the reader. It's almost one of the contracts we have is we will bring you resolution. There will be an answer. You're not going to go away with an open-ended question.
Absolutely, Hester. I think of a movie, The French Connection. William Friedkin, excellent. Gene Hackman, excellent film, except what's the ending? And I thought that was a travesty. I thought that was terrible. I don't mind an anti-hero in the sense of Walter White in Breaking Bad, for instance.
Yeah. Oh, wasn't it brilliant? Yes.
One of the most brilliant things on TV. I don't mind an anti-hero, but it ended. It came to a conclusion. And our job is to, create conflicts and raise questions throughout our stories. But then those have to be, to a single one, have to be resolved. Not Absolutely. In a happy way, but in a way that's satisfying to the readers.
Yes. Exactly. And that doesn't always mean tying it up with an absolute bow, does it?
Oh,
but
no.
the questions themselves, the questions that the reader has been wanting to know the answer to, have to be answered.
Oh, yeah. And I mean, I will never kill off my my main characters. Why not? The bank that holds my mortgage depends on me. American Express depends on me. I'm not going to, I need that, it's a business, let's face it, and readers will be upset. I can remember when I'd see some film and, or read a book and the hero, was at the end. Oh no, that's just terrible. That's not part of the contract. I knew a fellow who wrote a series about a very interesting bad guy, and the hero killed the bad guy at the end, and the reviews came out, and the audience kind of liked the hero. He was okay, but they loved the bad guy who'd been shot and fell into the New York harbor to die. The next book, the villain comes back again. And the second paragraph of the book was, miraculously he survived. So
miraculously, it was a dream.
It could have been a dream sequence, exactly. So
no, that doesn't work.
Well, of course,
it goes back to what you say about believability again, doesn't it, as well?
What's that now?
It goes back to what we said before about believability. You have to believe in the premise, you have to believe in the resolution.
Oh, yeah. And, the things I like about your writing is that there are no give me a break moments. In my course, that's a standard. Give me a break. When you read a passage, read an entire book or read a passage that you're writing, and step back in the minds of the reader, do you say, oh, give me a break?
Yes.
Come on, this could not happen. It's a speed bump. It takes the reader out of the book, and we can't have that. They have to be completely absorbed, but none in your books, none. In this book, none. It's just the reader is actually another character in the book, in a way, you might say.
Thank you.
Well, now I have to ask as we're getting sadly near the end of the interview, what is next?
What is next? I have a new novel coming out in the UK called All the Little Liars, and it will be out at the end of August. It's also inspired by true crime. It's the story of toxic friendship and teenage angst that asks, how far would you go to belong? So it's a little bit different. So not a killer, but what it does, like Truly, Darkly, Deeply, is it's looking at a crime from the periphery. So again, it's told not through, you don't really see the bad guy, if you want to put it in inverted commas, voice. You see the impact on the family left behind, and it's told through the voice of the sister, also 2 different timelines. So you see what happened and the sister trying to make sense of what happened, but also the aftermath. And then there's a big mystery element as well. There are questions that just don't make sense.
Well, I'll be the first to sign up for that. I probably am not the first to sign up. I'll bet lots of people have already signed up for it, but we'll look forward to that. Now, fast question that I meant to ask but forgot to. Did your training, the psychological training at university, did you draw on that, or was it in a different field altogether?
I think one always draws on what one has learned, and I'm fascinated by the way people think and how the way they think impacts on their actions. So yes, absolutely. I think it's really, just as it's important to draw rounded characters, it's also important to be psychologically true. And that was definitely comes out of what I've studied. Yes.
Oh, okay. Yeah, very helpful. I think I went to law school, and I went to journalism school, and journalism school taught me where to put commas and periods and sentences. And then law school didn't teach me a lot. It taught me a little bit about research, but there's always something we can draw from there.
Yes, but, yes. And sometimes it's not what you think, is it? It's something completely different that you pick up.
Exactly. Yeah. Well, I don't want to take time away from your busy writing day. I know you're going to get back to writing something now. I'm going to get back to writing something now after I free my co-authors. Oh, did I mention the dogs? And we're going to go for a walk now and cogitate about the next book. I can't thank you enough for helping me with this wonderful conversation. Thanks to everyone out there. Thanks to our friends at Barnes & Noble. And remember, barnesandnoble.com and your local Barnes & Noble brick and mortar store. Don't forget to go there to buy Victoria's book. Thank you all for coming, and look forward to seeing you all, and you too, Victoria, when I'm back in Harrogate. Will you be there in... Oh,
No, I won't, but I'm very much hoping to buy you a drink in London because I definitely owe you for this.
I have to go through, this is the Harrogate. It's the Old Theakston
It is wonderful.
festival up there. And so I have to go through London to get there. So we're on for that.
There you go. We'll definitely do that. That would be lovely. Thank you so much for your time, Jeff. And thank you to everyone for coming to listen to us.
Cheers, everyone. Bye-bye now.
Bye.